Hey everybody, this is Bart with ExtremePara.com. Today we're going to be going through what it takes to make a 9-inch bracelet using our mini jig and in two colors, black and gold, with a 1/2-inch curved buckle. Now to make this, you're going to need a couple things. Obviously the first thing you'll need is a mini jig, and you're going to need a lighter. I use the Turbo Flame, which is this lighter here, which is pretty good. Has a pretty steady flame and it works pretty good in the wind. If you're new to making paracord bracelets, I'd recommend using just a regular Bic lighter, something similar to this, to start off with. The reason I suggest that is that these flames are a lot easier to control and they're not quite as hot. The Turbo Flame actually is rated to get up to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty darn hot. It can melt your cord really fast if you're not careful. The Bic lighters are a little harder to use in that the flame can jump around in wind or with air currents. But the fact that it's lower temperature gives you a lot more time to deal with melting the ends when you fuse things together. So if you're new, I really recommend these over the Turbo Flame or something like that, but you need some kind of heat source. You're also going to need some kind of cutters. These are some cheapy Harbor Freight cutters I get for like $3. They're flush cuts, but they cut really well and really cleanly, so I like to use those. And they're cheap. That way if I lose them, which I do a lot, I don't have to worry about them. And so, like I said, you need a buckle. In this case, we're going to use a 1/2-inch curved buckle. And then you need 2 pieces of rope. Now, since we're doing a cobra stitch, or cobra weave, or Solomon bar, whatever you want to call it, you need total 1 foot of cord per inch of bracelet. So I'm making a 9-inch bracelet, so I need 9 feet of cord total, which means I need 2 4.5-foot pieces. Okay, now this cord is pre-cut. It's out of one of our buckle starter kits. It's pre-cut at 5 feet, so I'm not going to cut it again, but I'm going to use that. But it's 5 feet long, each one, right? And that's where we start. So the first thing we have to do to make the bracelet is we're going to take the ends of the cord and fuse the 2 cords together to make one long cord. So the way we're going to do that is, you take the cords. Now this is the easiest way I found to do it if you're actually going to singe them together. There's another method where you don't singe them together, and there's a couple other methods for joining them, but in this case, this is what the majority of people do, is they take the 2 cords. I like to put them together close like this. I get my torch, and I start to melt, and I do it until I see them really starting to smoke and develop like a little bubble on the end of melted nylon. And then I push them together, like so, and I hold them there for about 10 seconds or so, right? And I'm pushing them together as I hold them, and then it'll get to where they're together now. I'm pulling them apart. Now, one thing you noticed I did is I actually touched it. You got to really wait a few seconds before you do that, or else you'll burn your fingers. It's very important to know. Alright, so now they're fused together and it's pretty taut. So the next thing we'll do is we'll lace it into our buckle. Now, buckles have 2 ends. They have the male end and the female end. I always set up my jigs so that I have the female end towards me, right? And then the male end away from me. Like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cord, and I am going to make what's called a lark's head. That's easier if I do it. I take this out. I'm going to pass the cord through from what's considered the top of the buckle, or the outside, right? Make a little loop like that, and then I pull the ends through, right? And then I make what's called a lark's head, and that's what that is. Now if you notice, I have the seam not here, but here. Now that's important because if you put the seam right here where a lot of people put it, that's a wear point. And eventually over time that will get worn by just rubbing up against stuff. And eventually that seam will break. If you put it here on the side, that'll be all wrapped in the Cobra stitch, and even if it were to break, the Cobra stitch would hold it together. Okay, so now that that's done, put our buckle back on to our jig, and we'll take our jig, and now we're gonna look at how the cord lays out. Notice I got the black on the right and the gold on the left. Take my gold and just lay it off to the side on the left. I'm gonna take my black, and I'm gonna lace it in to my buckle, going from the top to the bottom, or what might be considered the outside to the inside of the buckle, right? I'm going to take the gold on the left, and I'm going to go from the bottom to the top and pull it through. So now this is what I've got. I've got one cord going from the top to the bottom and one going from the bottom to the top. Now this is a little trick that you won't see many people do, but I'm teaching it to you because it will make your cords lay out better when you go to tie your first knot in the Cobra stitch. So from here, what you would do is take the one that's going from the top to the bottom and bring it over. Take the one going from the bottom to the top and bring it below and start your Cobra stitch. That's the first thing you have to do. Now if you notice, look how much nicer that lays out if you instead of doing them both the same way, right? Now making sure this is kind of taut. Doesn't have to be super tight, but you do want all the slack out. And now we can start our weave. Now how you start your weave is you look for the side that makes the bump. That's this side here, right? And we're always going to use the same rope on that side. So since it's the black, we're always going to have the black on top. So the black is going to go like this. The gold is going to go over the black, behind the two in the center, which is the core, and through the hole, right? And we're going to create our first full stitch, right? So now you notice the black is on the right. We're going to take the black over the core. We're going to have the gold go over the black, behind the core, and through the loop we created with the black line. See? And you notice that it alternates. So now the gold hump is on that side, so we're going to take on the left, we're going to take the black from the left. We're going to go over the core. We're going to take the gold, go over the black, behind the core, and through the hole that we created with the black. And pull it tight. Now it's important when you're tying these that you try to create consistency in the stitch so that it looks nice and tight, so when you're done it'll look something like that. Now this has a third color laced into it, but you can see that the stitching here is nice and consistent. Every one is about the same size, and you do that by practicing tightening up your knots when you go along. I've tied thousands of bracelets now. So at this point, you just continue the weave, going all the way to the end. You can watch. I'm going to do this kind of quick, so I don't bore you with how this is done, but just keep going the same way, nice and consistent, all the way through. Tightening up as we go along, just like this. Now the jig does a lot to help us along in holding everything together, so we can concentrate on consistency with our knots. Now here's a little trivia for you. The Cobra stitch or Solomon bar is based off of square knots. That's all you're doing. When you tie square knots all day long, like when you tie your shoes, this is the same thing. Just one is in front of the core, and then you alternate and go behind the core. That's all it is. Now we just keep going along, consistently tying the knots, applying about the same amount of pressure every time when we pull them. And that's what will give you your consistency, which is really important when you're trying to make bracelets. It's something it takes a little time to develop, but once you get it, it works out really well. Now we're just going to get to about at the seam. And we're just going to go right over it. Just like that. Just keep going. Now, I'm tying this with a really good brand of cord. It's called, it's 550 paracord, and it's made by a company called EL Wood. It's one of the better cord manufacturers out there. If you notice, everything lays out really nice and neat. There's no twists or funniness in the inner strands. If you use lesser expensive cord, you'll sometimes find that it doesn't lay out exactly right. Well, it's just, if you have that, you just have to watch what you're doing. Sometimes you have to actually twist the cord a little bit to get it to lay right. So just keep that in mind if you're tying and you see a lot of that. So a lot of people might stop right there. I actually like mine kind of tight, so I'm going to go one more, and then that'll be the end of it. And I'm like right up on that lark's head. When I tightened that last one up, it pushed it. So now I got a really nice tight bracelet. Some people like them a little looser. Personally, I like to have it nice and tight. So there you go. You can see how everything lays out. This is nice and flat. Now, one thing I should point out is the reason I do my lark's head this way when I first start is I like to have this lump on the outside on a curved buckle. So it's sitting here as opposed to sitting underneath, which will create a bump. And that'll aggravate you when you're wearing your bracelet. So it's just kind of a better way to lay out that lark's head. Okay, so at this point you kind of put it together, make sure it looks right, everything looks right. If you have your person there that you're making it for, this would be a really great time to test it to make sure it's okay before you cut these tails off. You notice we have about 8 to 10, 12 inches of cord left over. That's good. Means we've kind of measured everything out right. So at this point we want to cut these off. So my method for cutting them off is to